what caught my attention was not only his rounded top tan hat, and it had this beautiful beaded hat band. And I went, wow, there's got to be a story behind that. This medicine bag that was in my pocket was starting to glow, and I felt a warmth on my leg. And so I snuck up on him and got within 5 yards, and I could see his antler tips.
All right, so now I think it's probably a good time. You know, we've had people on the hook long enough, waiting long enough. But let's just go for as much detail as you want to talk, Paul, you know, beginning to end of this moose hunt. Because this is initially what, you know, enthralled me into your storytelling. Because it was just it's a wild, like, story of, you know, however people want to phrase it, you know, it's magical. I gotta say, it really, like, when I heard it, I was like, this is exactly what, like, I feel like people should know, like, you know, can happen on a hunting trip in the you know, serene kind of almost I would say, like, happenstance or beyond a shadow of a doubt kind of luck and fortune that can happen on some of these hunts, you know. And it's just, I think, the kind of story that a lot of people think don't really happen anymore nowadays, right? Of all the things that occurred. So I'm gonna hand it over to you, Paul, but please just walk us through the whole thing, you know.
Yeah, it sounds like it started in a Starbucks.
Well, when I came to Colorado in 1991, I started applying for a moose license. In the first couple of years, when there were less than 1,000 moose in Colorado, it was basically a lottery system. Either you drew or you didn't draw. But then after about 3 years, when the moose population got to be over 1,000, maybe 1,500, and now we have at least 3,000 Wyoming Shiras moose in Colorado, there's a preference point system. So you apply 3 years in a row to get into the system, and then you get a weighted point. And as you gain weighted points, that should give you preference over somebody that has less points. That doesn't always work because some units where the supply and demand is slightly different, or just a luck of the draw, you might draw a moose license, whether it's a cow or a bull, prior to somebody else who has more preference in points. And since Colorado Parks and Wildlife went to the pay later system instead of charging you for your license right up front, they said, you know, it's costing us a lot of money on credit card charges and renewal. I mean, pay back the money. So let's do a pay later system. If you draw, we'll take it from your credit card. If you don't draw, we'll just charge you $8 for administration. Well, what happened, that increased the amount of people applying for those 500 licenses a year from 25,000 to 52,000 people. So the odds went down, even though the number of animals went up slightly. So I told Tricia, and I had 25 years of applying, and being at my age, and, you know, reality check, you're not going to be on the planet forever, and sometimes your physicality is decreasing a little bit. And I told her that, gee, I'm starting to age out of this moose hunt because I'm a solo hunter. I like to be by myself. I like to use my own skills, not relying on anybody else to get an animal. I like that close encounter with the animal and do it on my own. I tell people the animals we're hunting are full-time animals. They're in the wild full-time, and we're only part-time hunters. Yeah. So some of us are more than part-time hunters, but a lot of people are just weekend hunters or just hunt periodically. And like Mick here, he's trying to become more of a hunter, and it's going to take him years to gather those skills, whether he goes on YouTube or videos or talks to me or joins an organization like the Colorado Bow Hunters Association or somebody else to get mentored or get advice. And so I've acquired a lot of those skills. So this year, I applied for my elk tag in a flat top wilderness area and actually drew it. And I've killed 4 bulls and a cow up there with my bow and been very successful. And what I do there, just to give you a little background of how I work, I like to hunt by myself. I like to rely on my own skills. And I like staying in one area for a while. So I would gain 1,200 vertical feet from my truck It'd take me 3 hours and 15 minutes to get up there with 40 pounds on my back, and I'd set up a little mountain tent with my mountain tent, or my mountain camp with my tent. I'd get water out of the creek, and I'd have freeze-dried food, and I'd hunt a couple hours in the morning, a couple hours in the evening. I wouldn't get in their bedding areas where I'd spook the elk out. I didn't want to leave any human sign around.
Mm-hmm.
And I was successful that way. So that's what I enjoy. Now, the moose hunt then, I could just envision me being 2 miles from my truck with a 900-pound bull moose laying on the ground and all by myself. Holy moly, am I aging out of this? Or maybe I better start contacting some of my friends to see, hey, would you be available to help me pack this 300, 400 pounds of moose meat out if I get one down? Oh, sure. Well, I had their phone numbers. I had I had them on my list to say, well, maybe if they're available, but I couldn't really rely on them. So even before I knew I drew this moose tag, and this was a miracle, I told Tricia, I'm aging out of this stuff. I doubt if I'm ever going to get a moose tag. I've applied for 25 years. So before I knew I drew this moose tag, I was at a local coffee shop, Starbucks. I'll give them a little pitch. And I like to chat with people. So I might compliment somebody on, well, what are you reading today? Or what book are you reading? Or is there any good news in the newspaper? Or, what kind of lifestyle do you do? What do you do for a living? I'm always amazed because when I was a sales rep for a large company, I had driving around my car with a 3-piece suit on, and I had to stay in motels and do my business. I see people sitting in Starbucks in their shorts in the summer with their computer conducting business.
Yeah.
Well, gee whiz, that's a big change.
Yeah.
Doing your business at home or out of a coffee shop. So it was in late May, and I walked into Starbucks, and I ordered my coffee, decaf mocha, extra hot, extra pump, no whipped cream. They kind of know, oh, Paul, the original? Sure. I turn around, and a gentleman with his back to me, what caught my attention was not only his rounded top tan hat with a round bill, not like a cowboy hat, but a round bill. And it had this beautiful beaded hat band. And I went, wow, there's got to be a story behind that. And I went, sir, what a great hat band. There's got to be a story behind it. This gentleman turned around, and his turquoise earrings swung in unison. And I looked at his face, and I doubt if he had ever shaved before, because he was Americanized Apache Indian that I found out later. And he told me the story that he respects his elders. He goes down to Arizona and visits with his grandparents. He attends their ceremonies. He understands the history of his Americanized, or his Indians. His sister and 2 brothers are more Americanized than he is. He tries to teach the youth, the Indian youth, about the history of the Indians and their culture. And I thought, gee, this is really cool, because I told Mick and Pat that I had been studying a lot about the American Indians for the last 10 years. Some of it fictional, some of it based on anthropological advice, but a fictional story. Read some Louis L'Amour books about the Western migration of Europeans before and during and after the Civil War, and how they came west searching for their fortunes of gold, silver, land, freedom. And so as we talked, Cloudsenfire, his name, noted that I was a hunter. And I told him I just came back from Nebraska turkey hunting with my bow, and I killed a nice Merriman's turkey. A Merriman's has a nice white band across the top of the feathers and near the rump. And I collect those feathers by cutting off this fan and drying it out on a piece of cardboard so it stays that way. And I had that fan drying out at home. And he said, do you have any extra feathers? And I said, oh, matter of fact, I do. I've got this fan drying at home. I said, what are you going to use it for if I give it to you? He says, we'll use it as a spiritual fan in our ceremonies to bathe spiritual smoke over our bodies and our ceremonies. And I went, wow, that's cool. Because I had heard about that in some of the stories and some of the history of the Indians all across our continent that did that.
Yeah.
They could have, I'm reading a book about Crazy Horse. And before they went into battle, they would pick up dust off the prairie and rub it on their horses to give them energy. And so this was just sort of that spiritualness that the Indians had. And so I brought this, I said, I'll be back in 10 minutes, or 15 minutes, I'll be back. So I bring it back. He said, Paul, let's come on, follow me outside. Okay. So we go outside, walk around the corner, and he pulls out of his pocket a tan bag made out of tan hide off of an elk or a deer. And he said, this is my medicine bag. Of course, we have heard about medicine bags.
Sure.
That the Indians would have a variety of things in that bag to give them to not only praise the spirit, their Lord, but also give them strength in battle or strength in searching the buffalo or bringing home meat or being a strong warrior or a leader. And so he pulled out this medicine bag and he took out some powdery substance, which turned out to be corn pollen. Now think about the Incas, the Aztecs, Central American Indians that grew corn and fed thousands of people because they understood irrigation. They understood mathematics. They understood the cylindrical heavens of the stars. They were builders. Sure, they enslaved people. Sure, they warred, but they had a lot of intelligence and they knew the power of the corn and the maize. And so the corn pollen was very spiritual to them. And so Clouds and Fire, who was a Americanized Indian, and also the Navajos thought the same thing. So they relished the corn pollen. So he had this in his medicine bag. So he gives me some in my hand and he says, Paul, put this on your face. Dust your shoulders with it. Dust your legs with it.
Smoke break.
Smoke break.
Hey, Ken, it's Mick, and I've got something important to talk about. We all hope we never find ourselves in a self-defense situation, but life's unpredictable. Enter the National Self-Protection Plan from Attorneys on Retainer, an actual credible law firm you can put on retainer for your self-defense needs. For just $35 a month, you get national coverage in all 50 states for criminal and civil legal representation in self-defense situations, complete with a 24/7, 365 toll-free emergency line. That's real legal support when you need it most. What's in the package? Bail bonds, scene cleanup, firearm replacement, even mental health counseling. Plus, zero fees for a laundry list of defense-related costs like expert witnesses. So support the show and get yourself some peace of mind. Click the link in our show notes or visit our sponsors page to sign up for the National Self-Protection Plan from Attorneys on Retainer.
Hey folks, Pat here. If you're like Mick and I, you're a fan of classic tales like Lonesome Dove, Blood Meridian, The Three-Body Problem, and Steinbeck's East of Eden. With Audible, you can dive into these epic stories anytime, anywhere. Sign up for a free month, and your first audiobook is on the house. To start your free trial and support our show, click the link in the show notes or swing by the sponsors page on our website.
Want an awesome website for your podcast? Check out Podpage. We use it for the Mick and Pat show, and it's a game changer. Set it up in minutes, no coding needed. Support the show by using our link to get started. Your podcast deserves a home as great as ours. Podpage, the one-stop solution. And you put it on your face?
Put it on the face.
Kind of helped you?
No, I had it in my hand. He says, put some on your shoulder and now put some on your pants. Then he took some and he dusted the feathers I gave him, this fan. What was really amazing then, he turned to the east, the eastern compass, and looked east. And what is it about the east? Well, the sun rises in the east. Now, we all know that. But what symbol, what spiritual symbol that could that be? Well, the sun is giving our planet the life every day. It's bathing our planet, the animals, the earth, the crops, the grasses, the trees, with life.
Mm-hmm.
He pointed that direction, took some of the corn pollen and threw it in the sky to the east and said something in Apache. Then he turned to the south and did the same. To the west, he did the same. To the north, he did the same in that sequence. Then he looked to the heavens and said something in Apache, and also to the ground. And I'm struck.
Mm-hmm.
Starstruck, maybe?
Yeah.
I'm just, wow, this is too cool. We go inside and we talk more about this.
Did he tell you what kind of blessing he had just done, or
I looked it
prayer?
up. Well, I actually looked it up, and I can't pronounce it in Apache, but he said 4 or 5 or 6 words, praising the spirits and whatever God and spiritualism they wanted to utilize.
Mm-hmm.
And I went on the internet and examined more of this about the four compass readings and how they praise that. So then he says, oh, and we went inside and talked more about this. He says, Paul, I'm going to get you a medicine bag of your own. He says, because after talking to you, Paul, and knowing what you told me about when you kill an animal and you walk up to it when you find it and put your hand on its warm hide, you thank our Lord for giving you, and that animal for giving you his life to sustain yours.
Mm-hmm.
You have that little ceremony. And I told him that earlier, and he really appreciated that. He says, you could be one of our elders. All right. And I took that as a wonderful compliment.
Yeah.
So he was going to show up again in a couple of weeks. So during that time, as a turkey hunter, and I killed my turkey in Nebraska the first day, well, turkey season lasts 30 days. What am I going to do for the next 29? So I thought, well, I can go turkey hunting here in Colorado. I'll go over to Montrose in the Uncompahgre Plateau where I've been before. So I go over there and decoy in some turkeys and shot one the next day. And I collected one feather from that turkey's wing because it was sort of warm out and I wanted to gut the turkey out and take the feathers off and put it on ice, so which I did. But I kept that one finger and the beard off of that turkey, that little feathered beard that grows on their chest.
Okay.
So I brought those home and I was thinking, what could I bring House and Fire as not as a trade, but appreciation of his giving me a medicine bag. And so I found a elk tooth that I'd pulled out of an elk's mouth after I killed it. It's called a whistler tooth, and it's called an ivory, but it's not ivory, and it has nothing to do with their bugling, but it's called that. And people make them into rings, on necklaces, and a variety of trinkets that way. And I had some of those. So I thought, I'm going to bring him one of those for his medicine bag. And I also had a bear claw of a bear I had harvested with my bow years before. So I brought those to him and I gave him those and he gave me the medicine bag. And that was our meeting. And it was like, wow, kind of not totally life-changing, but life understanding from a different perspective of being an Anglo-American versus an Indian who had heritage and respected that heritage. So I go home and tell Tricia the whole story. And she's very, very spiritual and understands what I'm talking about.
Yeah.
2 days later, I'm sitting on the couch and she's in the computer office and she comes out and says, Paul, there's a notice here from Colorado Parks and Wildlife and I think you drew your moose tag.
Wow.
And I went, no. A lot of times you have to read it to the bottom because he'll go, well, thank you for applying. You did this, you did that, you did this, you did this. You were unsuccessful. So I go in there and check, and sure enough, after 25 years of applying for a moose tag in Colorado, I drew a archery bull moose license in an area only 80 miles from my front door to the west, over near Gould, over near Cameron Pass. And I was, wow, this is unbelievable.
Did you get emotional?
Yes.
Yeah,
yes.
I believe it. I would.
Yes. I mean, now, Moose are a different animal. They're the biggest deer species on our planet.
Mm-hmm.
Whether they're Alaskan moose, which get to be 1.5 tons, whether they're a Canadian moose, or whether they're a smaller version, the Wyoming Chivas moose.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, slightly different, but they're all moose. They all kind of respond the same way, and they're just kind of a big tank in the woods.
Yeah.
And unlike an elk and deer that see you and go, "Wow, we're getting out of here," a moose might stand there and go, "Hey, dude, what are you doing here?" Unless they smell you. But if they see you, especially during the rut or the pre-rut, they might kind of go, "Hey, what are you doing over here? You know, you're messing around with my girls. I'm going to come over there and kick you out of here." And so I did a lot of research on moose. I watched a lot of videos, and I saw that almost 90% of the moose I saw, whether they were in Alaska or in Nova Scotia or in Canada or even in Colorado or in Wyoming, with the bow were shot at less than 20 yards.
Wow.
Because they could be coaxed in or ambushed that way. And they didn't have that sense of flee right away. They kind of look at you and kind of, "Hey, I'm bigger than you are, and I don't have any natural predators at this size I am, so I can stand my ground or I can mosey off." And so I thought, well, I killed my last bull elk with my recurve bow at 20 yards. This moose would be a grand species to use with my recurve bow. And so I practiced a lot. And when you're shooting with a bow, it's all about shot placement and knowing your effective range. And that's what I would teach in becoming a bow hunter program when I was doing this for Colorado bow hunters. My effective range was 20 yards, a sure thing, and 25 yards at almost sure, but nothing beyond that. And with the size of a moose, which has a big body and big bones, I wanted to keep my shots at 20 yards, 25 at the maximum. So I have a 55-pound recurve bow that I shot the elk with. I'm shooting a heavy arrow of 600 grains for more downrange momentum and penetration, a big, broad, sharp broadhead. Okay, that I'm going to use on the moose. And I practiced and I was doing fine. I felt very confident. So I went over to Gould, and I'd hunted elk there the year before, and I'd killed a cow elk the very first day of the season with my compound bow at 25 yards. And so I knew the area, and I knew they had planted moose in here in the 70s, and there was at least so many moose based on Colorado Parks and Wildlife biologists' estimate of the moose population. There were so many cows and so many bulls, and they were only going to issue 10 bull tags, of which I got one of them. And I had basically the whole month from September 5th to the end of the month to hunt with my bow. Most of the moose, there's probably about an 85% success rate, almost 100% with rifle, 85% with the bows. And they also issued some cow tags in there too. So they got to keep that population cow bull ratio
balanced out.
Exactly. Yeah. And so I went over to Walden 5 different times and saw a moose every time. Now, I'd seen moose over the last 30 years in Colorado, and you see them and go, "Oh, there's a moose." And sometimes you walk right up to them because they're just a big black shadow in the shadows. Unlike a tanned animal, they're just all of a sudden there's a cow standing there or a bull standing there.
Yeah, you don't realize it.
And yes, exactly. And so I went over to that area and I saw moose every time I went over there. And what was interesting about this time around with the tag and early scouting, I saw bulls that still were in their velvet, because it's a deer species like the caribou and the moose and the elk. They lose their antlers every year and have to regrow them every year. All right. So once they grow them, all these blood vessels are going through this fiber bone, supplying the growth of these antlers, and it's covered with this velvet to protect that blood veins. But once the antlers harden in late August, early September, then that velvet is peeled off. They start scraping their antlers on a tree, and they get rid of that velvet. Then they're called hard-horned, and the elk do that. The deer do that also. Caribou do that. And so they're part of that deer family. Now, remember, back in 1962, when I was in the Air Force, I used a recurve and killed my very first deer species. And now 62 years later, I've got the opportunity to kill the largest deer species in our North America with a recurve bow. So I chose the recurve bow because I was confident in using it. I killed the elk with it 20 yards before that. And he only went 70 yards and down he went.
Mm-hmm.
And watching those videos showing me that most of the moose are killed under 20 yards, some as close as 4 yards, because they come out behind a tree or some willow branch. So I went down there and examined all that habitat, and I saw moose all going through their life cycles. I saw cow moose with their brand new calves, still with that little pudgy face, hadn't grown out.
Yeah.
I saw young bulls and major bulls in their velvet. And I started tracking down where these elk were, showing them on. I don't have a onyx mapping, but I have a topographic map that I was actually putting down where I was seeing them. And I elected 2 drainages where I concentrated on. One place I put some trail cameras up and had bulls and cows coming through there, and other places that visually saw them. So I had a really good idea where I wanted to go and hunt moose. Now, the elk season starts the 2nd of September. The moose archery season started the 5th. And then there was a muzzleloading moose season, which started the 14th. So I had a week before there might be any competition from a couple muzzleloaders that are moose hunting. But I didn't fear that because there's plenty of area in this area where I can hunt.
Sure.
And the odds of me running into any of those. But I did know that once the bulls lost their velvet, and that testosterone started rising in their system, and they were getting that mating desire, where you might see them early in the summer, they might disperse. And the bull that you might say, hey, I'd like to go after him, will he be in the area when I'm hunting him? He may have left and looking for a cow in estrus. We're starting to span. So a lot of guys that I met on some of my hunting blogs said, hunting the rut is cool, but once they disperse, you might have a hard time finding these bulls. So you might be better off getting them during that first week. So I was sort of concentrating that, but it being retired, I had the whole month to hunt. Hunting during the rut would be kind of cool, but I was going to take the opportunity that presented itself properly. Can I find a moose in the right situation with the right wind? Can I get up within 20 yards, make an ethical kill, see the moose go down, process it, take the meat home, pack it out if I have to. Well, not have to, pack it out, get it in the refrigerator, and have this wonderful, delicious wild game meat. So I go over there and scout 5 different times. Found some good areas to park, but there's also going to be some recreationalists in the area with their campers, which there were. There were some guys that were going to start pre-scouting for elk that started on the 2nd, a few days before I was going to moose hunt. But the moose are a different animal. They will wander right by somebody's camper. Where an elk and a deer wouldn't. So they're just a different creature. They're like from a different planet.
Yeah.
They're big. They're kind of not clumsy because they can really travel. They get running. They can really travel. If you get around a cow and a calf, she can trample you. And there's been instances of that in Colorado. The bulls are kind of, they got their brains in their pants.
Yeah.
Basically.
Yeah.
During that pre-rut sort of. The cows, they are really watching out. I watched a cow and a bull he was feeding, and she was 200 yards away, and she picked me out because I was standing there on the road taking a picture of her. She was watching me like that. The bull was kind of, nonchalant.
Yeah.
So a friend of mine who I'd met turkey hunting over near Montrose, well versed on moose hunting because he had been in on a couple in Colorado and elsewhere. Randy said, Paul, I can come over and camp with you. I'll bring my side-by-side Ranger, and we can get around on that. It'd be a lot easier than driving your Tacoma truck. I said, great, come on over. So he joined me 2 days before the hunt over near Gould. We drove and found this perfect camp spot. And there were moose right within 300 or 400 yards of the camp, wandering around in the willow bottoms and the moose bottoms, because they have to eat 20, 30 pounds of food a day to maintain that bulk. And they love this willow leaves. and birch leaves.
Okay.
And so we had a couple of days to scout around, and we saw a moose, trying to develop a plan. And the first morning, I didn't get a chance at doing any stalking, but we saw some moose. That afternoon, we're about a mile away looking over this huge meadow, and it was early afternoon, and two bulls crossed the meadow 700 yards away. And I said, boy, that'd be a good place to maybe ambush a moose if more moose cross that opening. I know where I'm going to be tonight. So that evening, I go up there and get in a position. I've got to play the wind, and I wait and wait and wait, and nothing comes by. But when I turn around and look 400 yards farther downwind of me, a big bull crossed an opening there, but he was traveling through. And then later I saw a cow and another smaller bull that area. I said, well, that gives me a good idea of where I might go the next day or the next day or the next day.
Mm-hmm.
So Randy and I go back to camp that night, and I hunt near the camp. Oh, and the next morning we get up, and as we're passing this big meadow within a fifth of a mile of our camp, I see a cow and a bull heading towards the timber where they're going to bed. I circle way around, get downwind of them. They're standing out there 200 yards away, going to head up into the timber. And I thought, well, maybe I can lure that bull over. Now, a bull in Colorado has to be, I think, 7 inches long in the horns, in the antlers.
Okay.
All the ones I've been seeing are branched antlers, and they got some different palms. Maybe they're 35, 25, 30, 40 inches wide with tips. But any bull would have been scoreable, would have been fine with me, and with the bow, that's fine too. So I started making some cow sounds that I'd heard on YouTube videos.
Yeah.
And they stopped, but they listened. And then I did some bull sounds, kind of a grunting, and they didn't do anything. Then I did some grunt sounds, and I was in the sun, but in the shadows. I couldn't move a lot. I was on the edge of this big meadow. I took a young pine tree and started whipping it back and forth, whipping it back and forth. And that was enough to give that bull an idea there was a bull there. And here they come trotting from 200 yards away up to 43 yards.
Wow.
And they're standing there looking for the intruder, but they can't see anything. And I think the cow drifted a little bit downwind and got my scent, and they turned around and left. And the next day, so now that was
2 days?
was Saturday, Sunday. So on Monday, Randy says, I've got to go back to Gunnison. I'm a project manager, and I've got some projects to work on. I've got to leave. I said, well, as you go through Walden, give Tricia a call and see if she can come and join me in camp. So he says, I will. Now, I kind of knew her schedule because she's a production manager at some of the theaters here in Fort Collins. And see if she could come and join me. She knows where I'm camped. So I hunt the meadow next to camp that evening, hoping to ambush that bull to come out of his bedding area, but he didn't show up. I get back to camp, and Tricia's there. So here it is, Saturday, Sunday, Monday afternoon. And I'm so glad she's there. I've got a little bit of company. Even though I'm a kind of a solo hunter, I've got my pop-up trailer there. We've got a nice, comfortable camp. So we get up in the morning, and we drive down the road at first light. And that bull and cow that I'd been after the night before were out there. But I'd been after them a couple of days in a row, and I said, I'm going to give them a break. So I drive down the road, and we pass another big meadow where I'd hunted Sunday afternoon, and no bulls there. I drive another quarter of a mile and turn down a road to another drainage, drive 200 yards, almost ready to cross a bridge, and I look up to my right into this long moose meadow with willows maybe 3 feet high. And what I see out there is a black 4x8 sheet of plywood standing in the field. But it had antlers and it had legs. It was a bull moose. And I went, oh, there's a shooter. So we backed the truck up. Tricia brought my lab Cheel with her, so they had to stay on the truck. I grabbed my recurve bow and my rangefinder, and I stalk up try to stalk up through the willows, and it's kind of hard because they're really thick. And there's no real cover except some little dips and holes where I can kind of duck down to. I follow this moose up into this little island.
Mm-hmm.
And he's about 100 yards from me. And he goes up there and he's grunting along the way. And he still has velvet on his antlers. So he's raking his antlers on some trees. He's grunting and he's doing a little bit of feeding. He's going through this pre-rut cycle. This testosterone level is raising up in him. And he's probably going to start really searching for cows that are going through estrus to be mated. I said, I've got to get out of this willow bottom. So about 60, 70 yards to my right was solid ground with a little hillside. Not much cover, but I could sneak along it. And the wind is still in my favor. And I get about 70 yards from this island where he's at, and his head goes behind some brush. I sneak across the meadow and stop every time he lifts his head. I'm 50 yards, 40 yards, 30 yards, 25 yards. There's a pine tree 5 yards more. If I can get behind that pine tree, come around, he'll be 20 yards and broadside. He won't know I'm there. I come around, he's broadside at 20 yards. I draw back my Great Plains recurve 55-pound bow. I pick a spot. I launch an arrow, hit him dead center, right through the lungs and heart area. Being a big animal, he could have just as thought, I was just stung by a bee.
Mm-hmm.
He trots off 70 yards and stands there, not really knowing what happened.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm just waiting for him to tip over. Even with a rifle, I've seen videos of moose that are shot once, twice, 3 times until they tip over.
Mm-hmm.
It's amazing the animal with that much bulk and power can handle that type of situation. I'm waiting for him to tip over. All of a sudden, after 10 minutes, he walks over towards the creek, and there's a tall bank there. And he beds down right at the bank. And I know he's going to die.
Yeah.
I know he's going to die. I could have just sat there for an hour and let him die.
Mm-hmm.
But I thought, I want to get another arrow in him,
Mm-hmm.
finish him off quickly. And so I snuck up on him and got within 5 yards, and I could see his antler tips, and then I could moved a little bit more, and I could see his nose and his neck, and then I moved a little bit more, and I could see right behind his front shoulder. I draw back and put another arrow in him. He jumps up, jumps into the creek 10 feet away, 20 feet away, and stands there on stiff legs,
Mm-hmm.
on wobbly legs, tips over and dies in the water,
Mm-hmm.
which is only maybe a foot deep.
It's a creek, right?
Yep. There's a dead bull elk laying in the creek. 25 years of drawing, 300 pounds of wonderful moose meat I'm going to be harvesting.
Mm-hmm.
I'm helping in maintaining the population. I'm
Mhm.
contributing dollars to maintain scientific management of wildlife.
Mm-hmm.
I have just shot the 9th species out of 10 in Colorado,
Heck yeah.
and only 50 some guys have killed all 9. Maybe 120 or 30 have killed 8.
Mm-hmm.
Only 3 have killed all 3. And it's a wonderful experience. Okay. And if you don't believe in higher powers, in the spirits, in our Lord, create this environment where we have these wild animals that are managed, that provide wild game food for those who want to hunt them. Colorado has it.
Mm-hmm.
And we have a moose population that allows that.
Mm-hmm.
And so I'm joyous. I'm standing there on the bank, and the morning is so quiet. It's like a cold, cool morning without a breath of air. The sun is up maybe just 20 degrees off the horizon. And I let out this yell, almost like a war whoop. Okay.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. I was so happy. And I went down to the moose, waited out, and put my hand on its warm hide and thanked it for giving up its life.
Mm-hmm.
I hike back to the truck. Tricia comes, and the lab teal comes. He had never seen a moose.
Yeah.
He had seen ducks and geese, and pheasants, but not a moose. So when he sees that moose in the water, he just couldn't figure out what it was.
Yeah.
Wasn't so sure.
Yeah,
about
he
it.
wasn't too sure about that. So Tricia took all these wonderful pictures.
Mm-hmm.
And I said, how are we going to get this moose out of the water so I can process it? Now,
Because how much weight is there sitting in the water? Like you said, 300 pounds of meat, but that's not how much a moose weighs.
no, so
Yeah.
the rule of thumb is a third. So let's say this moose weighed 900 pounds.
Yeah.
A third of that can be processed into edible meat.
Yeah.
And that's a rule of thumb.
Mm-hmm.
Everything else is in hide and guts and bone and
Yeah.
da-da-da. A third of the meat. If you take off every scrap of meat, you get a third. So
In your 84, I imagine Trisha's around you in age, right? And you got your dog. So how are you going to move this?
well,
Over
that's
1,000
that. So
pounds.
this is what's interesting. This is what's interesting. So after we did the pictures, I said, Tricia, I know exactly how this is going to happen. Because I felt this medicine bag that was in my pocket was starting to glow, and I felt a warmth on my leg about this medicine bag was glowing, was sending me some good vibes. Very spiritual.
Yeah.
So we drive back to camp. Now, 3 days before the moose season started, a quarter of a mile from our camp was a bunch of other guys going to hunt elk. They all had modern equipment.
Mhm.
They had modern bows. They had modern trucks. And as I walked in there prior to the moose season, one of the young men came over to me and says, Paul, it's Andrew. I met you at Jack's here in Fort Collins.
Mm-hmm.
And I said, Andrew, how nice. And then George and the other 5 guys walked up. George had pigtails. He had never shaved in his life.
Yeah.
He had a T-shirt that had sort of an Indian symbol on it. And the other guys looked very similar, some taller, some bigger. George understood about the medicine bag and says, Paul, I'm part Apache also.
Mm-hmm.
And all of my friends here are Americanized Indians, just like Fire, who gave me the medicine bag.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, do you see a connection here?
Yeah. Yeah.
Do you,
Time and place.
What is going on here?
Yeah.
And so when I came back and told them that I got the bull down and he's in the water, can anybody here help me drag him up out of the water? And it wasn't covering, it was like covering a third of him.
Yeah.
To the sandbar, maybe 20 yards away. And they said, yeah, some of us are leaving, but we'd more than glad. So they all followed me over there. We hiked up 400 yards from the trucks upstream
Mm-hmm.
to where the moose was. We tied some big ropes around it. I had brought my carving tools and my game bags and some plastic bags. I'll tell you about that later. And also, I brought a jet sled.
Mm-hmm.
Now, for those who ice fish, you might know what that is. It's a sled that's maybe 4 feet wide, 6 feet long, a foot high. It's made out of plastic. You tie a rope to it. When you go ice fishing, you put your ice fishing gear there and pull that across the ice, or you're behind your snowmobile. I've used it for my duck hunting. I put my decoys in and float them across the river that way. So I have this jet sled thinking that maybe if I got a moose down in an area where I could put the parts in it, I wouldn't have to put it on my backpack. I could pull it across the land a short distance to where my truck was. So I had this jet sled I brought. So after Tricia took a whole bunch of pictures, George had reminded me back in camp, because he understood about the medicine bag. He says, Paul, I'm going to give you a couple things and offer some suggestions on how we can bless this moose, like you told me you have in the past on other animals. I'm going to give you some dried white sage. And he gave me a plastic bag with white dry sage. Why would he even have this? He had this in his camp. He was sort of the lead guy of the group.
Mm-hmm.
He says, as we go in, pick up a flower or some bright weed or something that you can give to the moose. When we get near the moose and down in the water, put your hand in the water and give him his last drink. I'm going to give you a cigar in the wrapper, but it could be a candy bar, anything to give to that moose.
Mm-hmm.
So we all show up. The moose is in the water. I've got my medicine bag with the corn pollen in it. I've got the cigar. I picked a bright colored plant on the way in. I've got the white sage.
Mm-hmm.
We take the white sage and light a match to it and burn spiritual smoke over the moose in ceremony and thanking him for giving up his life.
Mm-hmm.
I take the bright colored flowers and break that up and put that on the moose and thank him for giving up his life. We take the cigar and broke it up and did the same thing. And then I take the corn pollen and look to the east, just like Fire did, and praise this moose, thanking him for giving up his life to nourish my family.
Mm-hmm.
And did that to the east, the south, the west, and putting corn pollen in the air. And that was the ceremony.
Mm-hmm.
I had brought rope. We pulled the moose up on the sandbar, and all these guys left. And so here I am, 400 yards from the bridge and my truck.
Mm-hmm.
And it's moose bottom and very hard to get through, and the moose is in the water. But now I've got a boat, my jet sled, that I might be able to float the moose parts all the way down to my truck without putting it on my back.
Yeah.
I mean, I've seen videos of guys with 70, 80, 100 pounds of moose, and they're having to hike 200, 300 yards, a quarter of a mile back to the river or back to their truck or back to their boat to get this moose out.
Mm-hmm.
It's a big animal.
Yeah.
So Tricia and I were there. So she helped me hold the legs up. There's a method called the gutless method, where you can actually take the quarters off the back straps, tenderloins, and the tenderloin without getting into the gut pocket.
Mm-hmm.
But since it was warmer out and the sun was up, but later it got cloudy, that's another blessing, I did the gut method. So I got all the guts out, let them float down the creek, left a pile over here for the other critters and birds to come and eat. Got the 4 quarters off, was able to rinse them off in this really nice drinkable stream,
Mm-hmm.
and still had hide on, put them in dry bags, game bags, and then put them in these large contractor bags and place them in the creek. So they couldn't get water in them, but the creek was a refrigerator.
Yeah, keeping it cool.
So here I have 4 quarters, the front quarters and the back, a bag of back straps, tenderloins, and other miscellaneous meat in a bag. Then I had the moose head and antlers there. So then I took the jet sled and started floating the parts downstream. And I was able to float them through the holes. I had my hip boots on. Was able to float them through the deeper holes off to the side. They slid right over the gravel bars because the water was flowing over there, and the gravel acted like little ball bearings. As I got within 100 yards of the bridge, I came around a bend, and there was a big tree that had blown down across the creek, and all the debris had backed up, and I couldn't get any farther. And then the bank across from me was high on both sides. And I'm tired after being up all day and doing all this.
Yeah.
So I said, well, I'm going to have to put all this meat in the bags on this gravel bar right here in the shade and put a tarp over it and get help in the morning. I go back for the last load. Tricia's over here 100 yards away on the other side of this moose bottom, which is all filled with holes and divots and little creeks that you can fall into.
Yeah.
And she's over there, and I'm going back for the last load. I'm halfway back, and all of a sudden I see this lanky, tall, young guy looking strong in his camo coming across the meadow bottoms. And he gets close. I said, hello. He says, I'm here to help. The medicine bag is working.
Yeah.
He says, I saw your wife up on the road and asked her if she needed any help. And she said, well, my husband is trying to get his moose meat to the truck. He says, I can help.
Wow.
So I meet him. He says, I've got a 4x4 Ranger. I can drive it right over here to the bank. He helped me then transport the moose meat in the jet sled across the creek, up the bank, in the back of his Ranger, and put it in the back of back of my truck. And then he leaves.
Wow.
Being a young guy from Texas, he's a CEO of a company.
Oh, nice.
Okay, in Texas. Okay, very helpful.
Yeah.
He left elk hunting down this drainage, but left early so he could drive 4 miles on his side-by-side back to his camp where his buddies were. He left early. He could have left later and we would have never encountered him.
Yeah.
So talk about the spirits of the medicine bag.
Yeah.
And the luck that it all achieved.
Yeah.
So we're back at camp that evening. We had some Maker's Mark and hot chocolate.
Nice.
And we were so tired that we just,
passed out.
Yeah. So the next day we broke back camp. It was cold enough at night. I laid out all the meat in the bags and it was down to like 34 degrees. So I didn't have to put it on ice. We gathered it all in the back of the truck, brought it back to Fort Collins, had a processor, Russ, north of LaPorte. He took all the 4 quarters, charged me $250 to put it in the roast and steaks and burger, and wrapped it, froze it. So I've got all that meat in the freezer. A good friend of mine, Matt, who does European mounts, said, Paul, I am blessed to do it. I'm going to do it for free.
Wow.
Because I know you respect all this, and I'm just honored to do it. So here's a picture of the final European mount on my wall in my man cave.
That's a good man cave.
Yeah, just to give great remembrance
of
all this. And so from day one, meeting Cloudson Fire, having Randy coming help, seeing the moose on scouting, meeting George and his band, having them coming and help, George offering advice about how to praise this moose after he has passed on and giving his life to give life to us, having not Randy, this other young man show up.
The Texas guy?
Yeah, the Texas guy show up, and then getting him back home, and then having Matt say, I'll do it for free, and on and on and on. And so I'm going to show this moose at the Pope and Young, at Colorado Bowhunters Banquet, which we're going to have over at the Budweiser Event Center.
Heck yeah.
And I'll get a little plaque for being number 9, and maybe the score of this moose might even give me a plaque for being number 1, 2, or 3.
Nice.
And then Pope and Young is a conservation organization that also keeps track of animals, of where they're hunted and the size of their antlers for history and for comparison of how well the game species are doing. And they do it all over the world. And so he'll probably make the Pope and Young measurement of inches. And so that will be in their record book. And I'll probably get a little plaque for that. And then I'll be attending the Pope and Young banquet and the Colorado Traditional Archery Association's banquet in mid-March. And I'll take it down there. And so this whole circle of hunting that I've been involved in, and then being able to achieve number 9 as the moose. The last species is the desert bighorn. There's only 300 of them existing in western Colorado. And it's an either choice. It's a season in November, and it's not an archery season. It's a either manner of take. You can hunt it with rifle, muzzleloader, or archery. It's in November. They only issue like 12 tags.
Wow.
And there's 25,000 people applying, and it's not a preference point system like the other big game animals. It's basically a lottery.
Luck of the draw.
Either you draw or you don't draw. And so there's only 3 bow hunters that have taken all 10 species. And so maybe in the near future, there might be the 4th and the 5th in the next 10 years. Maybe another miracle will happen. Maybe this medicine bag that I'm showing you right here is going to get really hot and, to handle. And when I look on the computer, it might say, Paul, you were successful. If it doesn't, well, I'm blessed that I have had the life I have had in Colorado, to be able to hunt the big game animals we have in Colorado, to utilize their meat, to bless them for giving them what the nutrition they have given us. And I just feel honored to be part of all that. So that's my moose story.
That's excellent story. And I got to hear like the abbreviated version when we were at Owl Cafe or Owl Canyon Cafe. But Pat, I just kind of want to give you an opportunity to ask any questions stuff, especially since, you're much more experienced hunter than I am.
Yeah, no, I think at the moment, no questions come to mind. I just honored to hear that story, have you share your passions for, hunting, a lifetime of hunting, and having such an incredible moose hunt this past season. It was obviously, not your standard hunt. It had a lot of very cool and amazing little pieces to that story of how it all came to be, and it's just looking at this picture of this moose and some other stuff you have on the wall. You've not, I think there's two parts to the testament of your hunting career being, one, successful hunter, but two, a lot of and maybe more importantly in some ways would be a lot of the stuff we talked about leading up to talking about the story, which was your active involvement in it. You didn't just do a lifetime of going out and killing animals. What you did was a lifetime of being involved with all of it, and taking a personal, charge to go to meetings, be a part of associations, put time and money where your heart is, be someone who's educated on the issues. And I think that's a huge testament too, as well, because that's a big part of being able to sustain for future people to come get to do what you've gotten to do. And so I would think you'd probably take the way you talk about it, take pride in that aspect as well. And
Pat, you're totally right. And I would plead, I usually don't plead, but I'd plead to any sports person out there that hunts big game in Colorado, or whether it's small game, is join an organization that supports the wildlife. I'm a member of the Rocky Mountain Elk Foundation. I'm a member of Ducks Unlimited. I'm a member of Trout Unlimited. I'm a member of the, I said Rocky Mountain Elk Foundation, Hope and Young. Mm-hmm. There's a lot more that I could be involved in, but back in the day, there was only a couple of organizations, and now there's a lot that you can get involved in. But Colorado Bowhunters is a statewide organization. A lot of these other organizations are national. So Colorado Bowhunters supports their members. And if there's any bowhunters out there that are not members of the Colorado Bowhunters, look up our website at coloradobowhunting.org. We have a great a magazine that we put out every 2 months, high quality, newspaper quality, or actually magazine quality, wonderful pictures and stories. Our mission is to help perpetuate and protect our bow hunting opportunities in Colorado. We did that recently when Colorado Parks and Wildlife and the Commission were considering making all archery elk licenses draw. And we convinced them through data and compassion that the best way to do this, to reduce some of the overcrowding in archers, because it's not only residents but non-residents, is to allow resident hunters to have over-the-counter tags, because we weren't the issue with overcrowding. It was so many non-residents are coming to Colorado. Yeah. So they're now limiting non-residents to come to Colorado. So just for that fact, we did our homework. We showed up at the meetings. We compassionately talked to the commissioners and convinced them that this would be the proper way to do it for the next 5 years. As I said, I was the Northeast Colorado Sports Person Roundtable person for 2 years. Put in a little time there, went to meetings, met with many of the wildlife managers, came up with topics that sports people could come. There's never enough people that come to these meetings, never enough people getting involved. For an example, we know there's at least 25,000 archery elk hunters in Colorado, and CBA only has 3,000 members.
Wow.
Yeah.
All right. Yeah. So we would like to have all bow hunters be part of the CBA family. Yeah. And support us sometimes, but so yeah, giving back is very important to me. Understanding what's going on, going to meetings. And being retired is a little easier, but even when I was working, I would go to meetings, getting things from the horse's mouth, understanding where it's all coming from. Not social media is great, but sometimes people can point fingers at you and you don't even know who they are. Yeah. And they can make acquisitions that they can't come back and you can't justify. But it's been a great conversation. Really appreciate you having me on your program.
And you had mentioned a website. You mentioned a website earlier that you put stories on. Is that your website?
No, it isn't. No, it isn't. So it's called bowsite.com, BOWSITE.com. It's free. The moose story is on there, so a person can go on there. It's free. You can't contribute, but you can see some of the posts.
Read
and so there's a conference for all the big game animals. You can look up the Moose Conference, and the story about this moose is Close Encounter Part 2, because Close Encounter Part 1 was meeting Klausenfire.
Yeah.
And then there's other parts of the story about mega moose scouting that I put in there.
Nice.
And but the whole story about this hunt in pictures, much like I told it, but with pictures, is chance encounter, because it was a chance encounter that I met Klausenfire. It was a chance encounter that I drew the tag. It was a chance encounter that Randy came, that Tricia showed up, that this other Texas gentleman showed up, that all of George and his group helped me. It was all chance encounter. And then it was a chance encounter that I found a reasonably representative bull moose that was going to provide a lot of wild game food. So it's called chance encounter. Yeah.
Nice.
Yeah.
Well, yeah. And again, Paul, I think I just speak for Pat and myself too, but we just feel blessed that you took the time out of your schedule and, able to meet up with us, and we were happy to kind of accommodate you too. So, yeah, it was just all around awesome. And I would just say too, if there's ever a time when you have another story you want to tell or another thing you want to talk about, like, don't hesitate to reach out. You have our information and email, and I'm sure, most of our listeners are going to totally love hearing from you in this episode, and I'm sure they'll look forward to any other time we can get you on.
Sure. Well, what comes to mind is I love the waterfowl hunt.
Yeah.
I'm
just getting into it.
I grew up that way in Ohio, and Teal, who is now 2 years, 3 months old, is my 7th black lab.
And it's named after teal, I bet, right?
Yes, either blue wing, cinnamon, or green wing teal. He's fast. He's American breed. He's a rocket ship.
Nice.
We called him our psycho pup for the first year because he was just so hyper. He's calmed down. He can do 100-yard blind retrieves. He can do triple retrieves. And actually, I'm a member of the Platte Valley Hunting and Retriever Club that gives him a job in the summer, gives me some more training and a job, and it makes him a better retriever and a great conservationist, because if I wound and can't find a bird, he'll find it.
Nice.
So, like I said, I went duck hunting last week. The migration hasn't started, come down because of the warm weather. We did shoot a mallard. He did a great job in the river getting it and bringing it back. We ate that duck the other day, and I'm looking for more because the season goes from basically now to the end of January with only a closure in December for a couple of weeks, 10 days.
Yeah.
So I'll hunt out on the South Platte River. I'll hunt a reservoir. I'll go down to Arkansas and hunt those. And I've trained all my dogs myself, and they're great companions, and they make us better people.
Yeah.
Yeah, because we have somebody to care for.
Yeah, it's
yes.
true.
Yeah.
Sounds like we have to do a waterfowl one at some point too.
Waterfowl episode.
Yeah,
it's my favorite
and
deal.
A little bit of dog training. So
yeah,
the whole thing. Well, thanks, guys. It was fun.
Yeah,
of course. Yeah, Pat, you got any sign off for us?
Till next time. Thanks for tuning in. If you love this episode, drop us a review. If you have qualms or comments, leave us a voicemail on our website. While you're there, check out our latest news, merch, and deals from our sponsors. Till next time, Ken.